I recently posted this video of Deadmau5 talking about his perspectives regarding pre-recorded DJ sets. And I'm gonna be honest, I agree with him in some ways, but I also disagree with him in other ways. And in this video, I'm gonna talk about my overall perspectives on pre-recorded DJ sets. This is gonna be like a fireside chat style video. I do these once in a while where they're very unedited, very raw. I'm just kind of talking off the top of my head because listening to a lot of very big artists talk about this subject, and even my own experience DJing festivals or nightclubs or shows or whatever, it's very interesting looking at both sides. And like anything in life, there's definitely both sides to this whole situation. Now, one big thing I do want to say right in the beginning of this video, I'm going to talk a lot about pre-recorded DJ sets versus pre-planned DJ sets. And these are two very different things. There is some gray area as well. In case you didn't know, a pre-recorded DJ set, I think the best way to think of it, like say you're DJing for an hour. You have an hour-long set at a festival. A pre-recorded DJ set is a set that's already pre-made and, as it sounds, pre-recorded. So in a sense, you could hit one button and do nothing for the entire hour, and there's your entire set, right? Like there's your entire show. A pre-planned DJ set is where you still have to go through all the movements and do the movements to go from one song to the next, but the whole idea of it is already planned. Similar to a band, right? You have song A, then song B, then song C. Maybe your transitions are planned, your cues are set. So you're like, okay, I'm gonna transition out of this song at minute 130 or whatever into this song. So the sets, you're still kind of doing the movement and DJing in the sense that could be debatable, right? Depending on how you look at it. I guess theoretically, yes. But everything is still kind of pre-planned. We're still planning everything out. And I'm gonna be honest, I think that there's definitely two different perspectives on this and a lot of different controversy. This has been a big subject for a while. I think especially as DJing has evolved a lot, and the big thing is the production. Deadmau5 did talk about that in his video. We mentioned, look, the biggest thing, which is true, I remember hearing about this when I got into kind of the festival circuit, is the lighting and the visuals, right? As you can imagine, if you're a massive artist, with these visuals being timed super on sync with every drop and it's instant, well, if you think about it, that's not the easiest thing to do for the lighting guy and the visuals guy, the pyrotechnics guy with the fire, the smoke machines and all that kind of stuff, or the fog, however they're doing it. It's a lot easier for things to be all synced up, so when the drop happens, there isn't this odd delay. Now, granted, technology has evolved, which I will talk about a little bit later in this video. However, that is a big thing, especially back in the day, that you're like, hey, whether your set's pre-planned or pre-recorded, we're gonna make sure that everything's synced up perfectly. That way the show is just overall amazing, not just with the music, but with the visuals as well. And it is interesting because a lot of people, when this has been brought up, being like, hey, you know some DJs have an hour-long set that's already pre-recorded, a lot of people are like, oh my God, that's such BS, this isn't real music. They're just pushing buttons, which I guess, as a DJ, I guess technically you are pushing buttons for getting super technical, but it's interesting though, when I compare this to a band or singer. One, like I mentioned earlier in this video, a lot of bands have set lists, right? It's very common. Yes, sometimes a band member will turn around, usually the singer, and be like, hey, let's do this song, or let's do that song. But a lot of bands, I remember I used to be in a ska band, have a set list. You're like, okay, we're gonna do song 1, then song 2, then song 3, then song 4, then song 5, or whatever. And it's weird that if I say, oh, this band has a pre-planned song list of the songs they're playing in order, people are like, cool. But then if I say, oh yeah, this DJ has a pre-planned song list of the songs you're doing in order in terms of the songs they're mixing, people are like, oh man, it's not real DJing, it's not real music, it's not real this, that's not allowed, basically. And it's like a little hypocrisy there. Another thing is lip syncing, right? I mean, in case you didn't know what lip syncing is, I'm assuming you do, but let's say an artist goes to the studio, records their vocals, they then go to perform them out live, and they're going through all the motions like pretending like they're singing, but nothing's actually being sung out, and it's already pre-recorded. And it's weird that if someone brings up lip syncing, although yes, a lot of people don't like that, they're like, well, you know, it makes sense, they already recorded the song, they're already a great vocalist, they're trying to save their voice, which is true, right? Which is true. And all these different arguments people propose when it comes to understanding what goes into lip syncing. Yet for a DJ, if a DJ does pretty much the exact same thing from a DJing perspective, like the lip syncing of DJing, where they're just going through the motions and pretending, twisting knobs and doing this kind of thing or whatever, people are like, oh, that's super fake, that's that's unbelievable. I can't believe, this genre is such BS. EDM isn't real music, and the arguments come out. And it is weird how people have that perspective, right? Now, for me personally, I do think there is, I think, a bit of a gray area in terms of the difficulty and the technicalities when it comes to pre-recorded and pre-planned sets versus just DJing on the fly. Now, for me personally, I've never performed a pre-recorded set. I've also never performed a pre-planned set. Every set I do is 100% improv in the moment, every single time. Granted, of course, I'm definitely not, of course, on the level of Deadmau5 or Skrillex or all these other massive artists. So who knows, maybe if I ever got to that level, which we'll see, you never know, if I ever did get to that level, maybe my DJing style would change. Maybe I would actually do pre-planned sets or even pre-recorded sets or whatever. Maybe it would change, and even Deadmau5 has admitted this. A lot of other artists have admitted that. I mean, it is tough to say, right? Because I remember listening to an interview with Afrojack, phenomenal DJ, by the way, and he was actually saying, which gave me a different perspective, that pre-planned or pre-recorded sets actually can be more difficult than DJing or improvising in the moment. And I remember when I first started DJing, I was like, oh, anyone who does a pre-planned set or pre-recorded set, BS. That's not real DJing. I had that perspective. It's not real DJing. Like, I think Deadmau5 in that video I posted joked about being the DJ police, right? Like, and I was kind of like that. I was like, oh, this is not real. But then Afrojack's perspective really changed it for me. I remember listening to this. He said, look, he's like, making a set that's pre-planned or pre-recorded does put you in this box. If you play that out live and it's not hitting, you have no choice but to roll with it. If, let's say, you're working with the lighting guy, the pyrotechnics in the back, the lasers, all this kind of stuff, if you're working with them and you say, hey, here's my hour-long pre-recorded set, I made it myself, right? Keep that in mind too. A lot of DJs, unless they're getting like a ghost DJ, so to speak, a lot of artists who do these pre-recorded or pre-planned sets do it on their own. So they're still making that set in a sense. And the hard part, as Afrojack said, is like, look, he's like, if you DJ for an hour by yourself in your bedroom, or in your studio, and you pre-plan this hour-long set, you better be sure that that set is gonna hit the right way at a festival. I've been in numerous situations, I think other DJs can agree too, other artists as well in any genre, that I go to this one festival or this one nightclub, and I'm like, oh, this is the sound I'm gonna start DJing. I start DJing that one sound or that one style, and I realize, this is actually not really working. And then I switch to a different style, and then the crowd goes crazy. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm gonna switch to this, right? Like, reading the crowd is a huge thing when it comes to DJing. I remember, for example, the first time I DJed at Swanee Halloween, which is a festival in Florida. It's a very like funky, jazzy, low trippy kind of festival. And I remember I was the closer of the silent disco of, I think it was like Saturday night. And I remember every single person told me, don't play any electronic music. Only stick with funk and jazz, soul, blues. I started DJing, and that's what I initially started with. And I remember, I was like, you know what? The crowd is not feeling it. I'm gonna switch to EDM. I'm gonna go to the exact thing every single person told me not to play. The crowd went crazy. And a lot of people said, like, hey, like, I love that set. By that point, I want to hear like not just funk and jazz, but a combination of that and electronic. It was a great set. And if I pre-planned that set, if I pre-recorded it of only funk and jazz and soul and no electronic, this set would have not been as good, right? And as Afrojack stated, there is, I think, a unique difficulty of pre-planning and pre-recording a set because you have to be sure the crowd's gonna like it. If, let's say, you go to that stage and let's say you're doing, I'm just making this up, big room house, and let's say the crowd is sick of big room and they want to hear more trappy stuff, well, you're stuck with that set. So I do agree with Afrojack that there is a very unique skill, one, that you still have to make that set on your own. It's not like you just, poof, put it together or whatever. You still have to kind of create all the transitions, DJ it out, put it together yourself, but also, two, you better be sure, and I think there is a difficulty to this, you better be sure that that set is going to hit. Because if you're DJing improv, I think there is a sense to say that it is a bit easier. Because if, let's say, you realize, like I mentioned what happened with me at Swanee Halloween, or other situations, if you realize what you're spinning isn't working, well, you could easily just transition to something else, which is what I did, right? But in a pre-planned, pre-recorded set, you can't do that. Another big thing, and Deadmau5 has mentioned this, I think other artists have mentioned this when it comes to pre-planned, pre-recorded sets, is really the production. Now, this could be a whole other subject for a whole other video, but it does bring up a unique thing of DJing versus producing, right? Very two different things. DJing is kind of performing, in a sense, the tracks out live. You're mixing, and there's a whole art form to the mixing and spinning and basically turntablism, so to speak. And of course, there's a whole other aspect of making and actually producing that music, right? If you think of it like a hip-hop artist, there are some hip-hop artists or rappers that I've heard that write incredible bars. Their lyricism is phenomenal, but when they perform it out live, they're not just that good of a performer, and vice versa. There are some people I've heard who are unbelievable, that if you give them like a really good set of bars, they can spit it, and it's phenomenal when it comes to hip-hop. But in terms of them writing those bars themselves, they might not be as good. Same thing with DJing and producing. And Deadmau5 has talked about this, that he's like, look, a lot of people talk about pre-recorded sets, pre-planned sets, or whatever. But let's be honest, the big thing at the end of the day is just making good music. That's always the number one thing. And for a lot of artists, you know, they will focus a lot on just the production aspect and have a lot of pre-planned, pre-recorded sets because you're like, hey, I just want to make really good music. That is the number one thing at the end of the day. And if I have to take what could be considered the easy way out of having a pre-planned set, which like I said, not as easy as a lot of people think, like what Afrojack was talking about, but if I have to have a pre-recorded set, I'm just gonna go down that route, right? And I think it is a very tricky area because I'm gonna be honest, I think that in the beginning when I first started DJing, I thought pre-recorded and pre-planned sets were, like I said, absolute BS, wasn't real DJing, so to speak. And it's interesting as the more I've gotten into the scene, and especially as someone who's performed, I do still think that a little bit, because it's also, I think, more fun to just DJ on the fly. Like, I'm not gonna lie, if I had a pre-planned set or pre-recorded set, I'd get bored. Yeah, maybe the money's there, right? So maybe I could like try to be in it because I'm like, hey, I'm getting paid this amount, or I'm getting paid this much, or whatever. But even so, I feel like I just get bored. It'd be tough for me to go through the motions if they were not truly there. Yeah, I could do some filtering or some beat matching or some effect once in a while right before the drop or something like that. So it's like, so it kind of pans out the right way, and I'm still kind of in it, right, so to speak. And a lot of people who do pre-recorded sets or pre-planned sets will use effects, so it still seems more live. It's kind of like a technique. But even so, I feel like I just get bored, right? I mean, I think for a lot of artists, at least for me, I love the aspect of DJing in the moment. I think it's way more raw, and you're way more connected with the crowd. But then again, I do understand both perspectives. Now, as time has moved on, like I mentioned earlier in this video, talking about the pyrotechnics, things have changed. There are a lot of lighting situations now that are phenomenally well done and well kind of synced with the music, where even if you're DJing improv or you're doing real DJing, so to speak, right, but you're actually doing it in the moment, you're mixing and everything, the lighting stuff can still be very synced. One amazing artist who I love the way they do this is Pretty Lights. I actually just saw him in Dillon, Colorado, in the Dillon Amphitheater. That's actually why I haven't posted a video in a while. I was actually traveling in Toronto at a bachelor party down in Colorado, went to Dillon, you know, I just posted a video of all this new unreleased Pretty Lights music, and what he does is he communicates with the lighting guy in the back of what song's gonna come next. So even though we may be mixing and kind of transitioning from one song to another, he'll communicate with Laser Shark, as his nickname is. He'll communicate with him to kind of be like, hey, like I think I'm gonna do this, or I might do this. And that way, he's still kind of doing improv, so to speak. He's still DJing, and well, he kind of travels with live band, so it's more like a jam band situation, but the lighting still works. In addition, a lot of technology has evolved, where maybe back in the day, you kind of had to have a pre-recorded or pre-planned set. Now, I don't think that's the case. Technology has come a far way. In addition, it's crazy that now a lighting guy, if you look at like the setup of a lighting guy versus, let's say, the setup of like someone DJing with Ableton, for example, the setups are very like the APC-40, for example, which is a very popular piece of equipment when it comes to DJing in Ableton. You could use an APC-40. I've seen lighting guys use an APC-40 or another type of like MIDI triggering like piece of hardware that's typically used for Ableton, but you use it for lighting. The whole aspect of being a lighting guy or lighting girl or doing the pyrotechnics and all that kind of stuff behind the scenes, that's a whole art form in itself now, and a lot of people are pursuing that rather than pursuing DJing or music. And it's crazy to see that that itself is a crazy, crazy impressive skill set that even if, let's say, DJ is DJing improv, they still have that ability to still be synced perfectly when the drop happens. So technology has evolved a lot, where I don't think you need as much now a pre-planned or pre-recorded set. And a big thing too is now social media. I think this is a very underrated thing. There's a lot of pros, a lot of cons when it comes to social media, and I know I'm kind of bouncing around a lot in this video, but to kind of finish off this video with this one important point that not a lot of people talk about, and that is the repetition of sets. John Summon has talked about this, that he's like, look, I've never done a pre-planned or pre-recorded set, because if someone wants to see me on tour, and they see me 5 stops in a row. They're like kind of following me along as I'm touring. They see me 5 times in a row. I don't want them to come to a show, pay money that they worked super hard to make and everything, go to my show and everything, and hear the same thing 5 times in a row. And not to bash some artists, because again, it's understandable. I listen to some artists who've gone on tour, and I've seen them like a couple times, like say in a row, for example. I'm not gonna mention any names, but I remember being like, oh, they're doing the same exact set. This is literally the same exact thing I just heard. And I'm like, oh, let me guess. This transition is about to happen. Yep, here it is. And I can almost predict, because I just knew from the last set, exactly what they were gonna do. And not saying it was a complete turnoff, because I do get it. Like, you're traveling, you're making a ton of music, it's difficult to balance all these things and juggle all these things at once. But at the same time, it's like, it is kind of annoying because I paid for a live performance. And as an audience member now, not looking at it from a musician's perspective, but as an audience member's perspective, it is kind of annoying if, let's say, not only is the set pre-planned and pre-recorded, which I think is understandable, but also it's like, I'm hearing the same thing now. So let's say if you have a pre-recorded set, let's say, let's take a step back, we have 20 pre-recorded sets, and you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 going down the line, that's one thing. But if you have one that you're using at almost every show, if, let's say, people post it on social media, where you live stream it, as Pretty Lights has been doing, has been on his kind of comeback tour, where he's live streaming every single set on Twitch. If you're doing all these different things and you're posting a lot online, people can get kind of annoyed in terms of the audience member's perspective of seeing the same exact thing every single time. And I think that is, I think, a huge con and something that's not talked about enough when it comes to pre-recorded sets, right? Because if you're DJing live, so to speak, and every single thing you're doing is kind of on the fly, it is 100% inevitable that every set's gonna be different, right? Now, granted, I think there are workarounds when it comes to this. I remember hearing a quote from Porter Robinson, very famous DJ and producer as well, that when he first started out, I think one of his things, he said he would play the first 3 songs at the beginning of every set. Every single time, those are kind of pre-planned, so to speak. He said after those 3 songs, he'd get a feel of what the crowd maybe wants or doesn't want, and then he kind of venture off. And to me, that was a kind of cool technique of being like, all right, I'm gonna use these first 3 songs as almost tester songs. Do people want to hear more trappy stuff or not? Or bass stuff or not? Or electro? Or housey stuff or whatever? You kind of feel that out and then go from there. And I think that actually is a really good way to tackle it, right? Granted, there's a lot of different techniques when it comes to DJing. That's definitely a whole other, I mean, there are dedicated channels just to the technicalities of DJing, different techniques and reading the crowd and all this kind of stuff. But I think a big thing at the end of the day is that the whole idea of pre-recorded sets versus pre-planned sets, in that whole category, I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all situation. I think that there's a lot of difficulty with both, like I mentioned with Applejack. Like for me personally, if someone said, do you think it's easier for you to DJ an hour set to a crowd or pre-plan an hour set at home and hit play, I think it'd be easier to play it out live. I prefer the improv of it, and it's a lot more fun. I think pre-planning a set, I think, is more scary because you hit play and you're like, I hope this hour hits. It could not. Maybe it doesn't hit. Maybe I was assuming the crowd wanted to hear this, but it doesn't. I actually think that is more difficult, which adds a whole other curveball into this whole debate. But I think at the end of the day, no matter what, I think that when people come out of the gate saying, oh, it's not real DJing if it's pre-planned or pre-recorded, I don't think that's the situation. I think that there's a lot of difficulty on both sides. But at the end of the day, as people like Deadmau5 have stated, it comes down to production, producing our music, making really good music, and performing it out live